Did you know that the international oil trade is changing as a result of the sanctions imposed on Russia by the United States? It turns out that foreign currencies, as opposed to dollars, are now being used to settle the majority of agreements between Russia and India, two major participants in the crude oil market. This is significant because, although the dollar has dominated international trade for many years, there is now competition. The dollar has maintained its position as the dominant currency despite previous challenges to its dominance because of how broadly recognized it is. However, things may be about to change. The US dollar is beginning to lose use in India's oil trade, and the conflict in Ukraine and the sanctions are to blame for this change. India, which is the third biggest oil importer in the world, now sources the majority of its oil from Russia, which is avoided by Europe as a result of the invasion of Ukraine that began in February of last year. An internet news source has been monitoring reports from analysts who believe that the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are attempting to devalue the US currency. Two reporters discussed how India's oil agreements with Russia have dent the US dollar's hegemony in the world oil trade in their January 12 article. Journalists were informed by insiders in the oil and banking industries that Indian purchasers are exchanging non-US currencies, especially the UAE dirham, for cash for Russian oil. According to these sources, during the past 3 months, trade between the two countries has totaled several $100 million as a result of these transactions. Knowing the story firsthand, the insiders chose to stay nameless in order to prevent any possible retaliation. Previous reports from sources claim that Russia is providing India with oil at a substantial discount. The price restriction was reportedly around $60 per barrel last year, according to many reports. It has also been asserted that a significant portion of the crude oil ends up in European gas stations after being sold for a premium. Indian purchasers have been paying for the majority of the oil they acquire from Russia with non-dollar currencies since a group opposing the war placed a cap on oil prices in Russia on December 5, according to a number of banking and oil trading sources. Among these currencies are the dirham of the United Arab Emirates and the Russian ruble, which was just included. According to 3 insider sources, Russian energy firms Gazprom and Rosneft, along with Dubai dealers, are looking for ways to get paid in currencies other than dollars for particular kinds of Russian oil. Furthermore, some specialty oil grades have been offered for sale for more than the $60 per barrel cap. As a tiny percentage of total sales, Russian sales to India did not violate sanctions. Furthermore, it is possible to get around the restrictions by using non-Western businesses like Russian insurance and shipping. In an effort to circumvent sanctions and to dollarize its economy, 3 Indian banks facilitated certain transactions. In addition, the new sanctions imposed by the United States and Britain may make it more challenging to continue paying for Russian oil in dirhams. Along with Moscow, MTS, an Abu Dhabi-based Russian bank, was added to the list of sanctions. Additionally, this bank provided assistance with non-dollar payments for Indian oil. Even though the majority of Russian banks have been sanctioned since the war, Russian suppliers and Indian consumers are reportedly determined to keep trading Russian oil, according to a source in the refining sector in India. According to the source, the Russian suppliers are actively looking for new banks to accept payments from. The Indian government hasn't asked them to quit purchasing Russian oil as of yet. Therefore, they are hopeful that in the event that the existing payment mechanism is stopped, they will be able to find a substitute. Now, for decades, dollars have been used virtually universally to pay for oil. But according to January data from SWIFT, the currency only makes up 40% of all foreign payments. The dollar is unmatched in its supremacy, according to Daniel On, a global fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and a former chief economist at the U.S. State Department. However, he also thinks that the sanctions may fail to achieve their intended objectives and wind up damaging the Western financial systems. A price cap on oil imports by sea was set by the EU in reaction to prohibitions and sanctions placed on Russia. This was a component of a wider ban on the import of Russian oil. Furthermore, Russia lost access to the global payments network SWIFT, resulting in the freezing of about $640 billion, or nearly half, of its gold and foreign exchange reserves. Moreover, Russia recently declared its intention to demand payment for its energy in the currencies of nations it deems friendly. To enforce this last year, they made unfriendly EU countries pay for gas in rubles. Due to payment blocking or delays, Russian businesses suffered as a result, regardless of whether or not they were breaking any sanctions. As a result, according to independent analyst and former Bank of Russia advisor Alexandra Prokopenko, dollars became a toxic asset for these businesses. She added that Russia's economy is highly dependent on the export of gas and oil, so trade with the rest of the world is vital. They are therefore investigating every avenue that may be open to them. Right now, their main goal is building a direct infrastructure that links India's and Russia's banking systems. The largest lender in India, State Bank of India, maintains a foreign exchange account in Russia. To facilitate trade, many Russian banks have also opened accounts with Indian banks. Sanctions against Russia, according to IMF Deputy Managing Director Geeta Gopinath, may weaken the dollar's hegemony by encouraging smaller trading blocs that use alternative currencies. She stated that the dollar would continue to be the primary worldwide currency in an interview with the Financial Times, notwithstanding the shifting circumstances. She did, however, also bring up the potential for smaller-scale fragmentation. Tensions between China and the West also play a part in undermining the long-standing conventions surrounding dollar-dominated international trade. In September, Russian President Vladimir Putin disclosed that the agreement was reached to exchange gas supplies to China for yuan and rubles rather than dollars. This move may be the result of China cutting back on its dollar holdings while Russia maintains some of its currency reserves in renminbi. However, India has surpassed Europe to become Russia's top seaborne oil customer. According to a report by the International Energy Agency in Paris, India's imports of Russian crude increased 16 times during the pre-war period, with Russian oil making up approximately one-third of all imports. Despite the fact that India does not recognize the sanctions imposed on Moscow, trade sources have stated that nearly all sales of Russian oil take place below the price cap and that the majority of purchases are compliant with the sanctions. However, in order to avoid inadvertently breaking any international law, the majority of banks and financial institutions proceed with caution when clearing payments. Trade sources claim that Indian refiners have lately begun paying for some of their Russian oil purchases with rubles. These payments were handled by the State Bank of India via its Russian Nostro Rubles account. The primary focus of these transactions is the acquisition of oil from Russian energy giants Rosneft and Gazprom. The dirham payments, meanwhile, have primarily been handled by Axis Bank and the Bank of Baroda. According to sources, India has set up a system for settling trade disputes with Russia in Indian rupees in the event that additional sanctions have an impact on ruble transactions. Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is optimistic that there won't be any serious competition for the dollar for a very long time. According to tanker tracking data tracked by Bloomberg on Tuesday, the more stringent implementation of the G7 sanctions and associated payment problems have been impeding India's purchases of certain cargoes of Russian crude oil. As a result, tankers that were originally destined for India are now heading back east. The G7 price cap of $60 per barrel, above which cargoes cannot use Western insurance and financing, was violated by several vessels, and the United States took a more aggressive stance on sanctions against Russia at the end of last year. Some of those tankers had already left Russia's far eastern ports for India, where they were carrying Russia's Sokol grade. Bloomberg ship tracking data indicates that 5 tankers carrying Sokol left for India last month. However, as of right now, all 5, the NS Commander, Sakhalin Island, Krimsk, Nelis, and Limni Prospect, are traveling across the Malacca Strait and away from India, indicating that India may not actually accept those purchases. The data indicates that a 6th tanker, the NS Century, is still in that area. The tanker has been stranded off Sri Lanka for months due to sanctions. India was still debating whether to let the now approved tanker carrying Russian oil approach and dock at one of its ports as of the end of November, suggesting that the U.S. crackdown on Russian crude trade may restrict India's capacity to import less expensive oil. The NS Century, flying the flag of Liberia and owned by Russia's state-owned fleet owner Sovcomflot, has been cruising off the coast of Sri Lanka since November 17, the day the United States sanctioned 3 ships and several maritime companies for transferring Russian oil above the G7 price cap. On November 16, the U.S. announced that following the implementation of the crude oil price cap, the ships Kazan, Ligovsky Prospect, and NS Century were involved in the export of Russian crude oil valued at more than $60 per barrel. According to tanker tracking data obtained by Reuters, India's imports of Russian crude oil are estimated to have fallen to an 11-month low in December as a result of the sanctions and payment problems. What are your thoughts on Russia and India efforts to ditch the US dollar in global trade? Let me know down below. If you want to continue to learn about business investing and financial education, we have got this video waiting on the screen for you to check out. Don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.